We go now to the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein. Senator, what can you tell us about the latest on the high threat level in Belgium?
Well, I think there is a threat level. Obviously, everything's on alert. It makes sense. I think there are concentrations of ISIL people throughout Europe. Europe doesn't have borders. It's easy to move, and that's very problematic. You know, ISIL has hit 9 different countries in about the last year. So it's really a huge escalating problem, and I think we have to recognize it and have a flexible strategy to deal with it.
Based on the briefings you've been given since Paris, how has that changed your feeling about the threat to America from ISIS?
Well, on the other hand, the United States has really spent time. The FBI, both under Bob Mueller and now under Director Comey, has investigations going on in virtually every FBI office in the country. So they are on alert. They have probably made, in the last year or so, some 50 arrests to disrupt plots. And one doesn't like to relax, and one doesn't like to say, oh, everything's perfect. But it is a very aggressive effort, and I think we all need to support that.
When the president says, as he did in Turkey, we have the right strategy and we're going to see it through, what does that make you think?
Well, that's a good question. Thursday, a couple of days ago, Secretary of State John Kerry, former colleague of ours, addressed the Senate Intelligence Committee, and virtually every member was there. And what he put forward, I think, was a more comprehensive sense of what the strategy is. For the first time, I really learned the number of nations that have signed on to the Vienna Agreement, the basic principles of the agreement, and involving both Iran and Russia. And I think that's very crucial. The point there is, because the central point of all of this is Assad, and Assad has got to go. But the question is how and where and over what period of time, because in the meantime, he's putting out barrel bombs with chemical weapons on his people. He's killed 250,000 people. Russia is his great protector, but Russia now sees the challenge from Daesh or ISIS or ISIL. And so my problem with that is you need a time agreement. And my hope is that when President Hollande comes here this next week, that our president, the Russian president, and the French president can really get together and talk about some very prudent, specific things that can be done in Syria to place all of our attention on ISIL, and that we deconflict with Russia, which we are trying to do, and have, as a matter of fact, a kind of partnership in going after them. Because it's only a question of time before ISIL is back in the Caucasus and other areas of Russia too.
You had been skeptical of the administration approach. Did the briefing from Secretary Kerry make you think that that approach is sufficient to the job at the moment?
I don't think the approach is sufficient to the job. I think there are general principles, and there are general principles in terms of the administration strategy too. But I'm concerned that we don't have the time, and we don't have years. We need to be aggressive now, because ISIL is a quasi-state. ISIL has 30,000 fighters. It's got a civil infrastructure. It's got funding. It's spreading in other countries, and it's a big, big problem. And now what you see, I think, in other places is a competition developing from other terrorist organizations. But ISIL is something apart. It's enormously strong, and it has to be dealt with in a very strong manner.
You mentioned the time component. Does that suggest the administration has been too cautious or lacks a sense of urgency?
No, what I'm saying is this has gone on too long now, and it has not gotten better. It's gotten worse. There may be some land held by ISIL in Iraq and Syria that's been taken back. But for all of that, there's much more they have gained in other countries. 2 attacks in Tunisia, 4 centers, Libya takeover, the Sinai, and it goes on and on. So I think we need a specific, larger special operations plan. A group of 50 is fine for what they're doing so far, but it's not going to solve the problem. And I think getting at the government in Raqqa in a way that one is not only able to get at the government, but change it, move ISIL out, that's where the head of the snake, so to speak, has to be cut off. That's Raqqa, but it's in many other places too. And we don't have a lot of time. There are needless deaths. We have over 1 million people that are refugees, that are trying to save their families, trying to run from it. And we find it in Paris and we find it in Belgium, and that's where they're running to. So it makes no sense.
Have you thought about, or would you suggest they look at additional ground troops, something more than special operations in terms of military engagement from the U.S.?
I think what people are worried about is an occupational force. And, you know, the thought of a no-fly zone has come up. A no-fly zone to enforce, we are told, takes 10,000, 20,000 troops to be able to enforce it. It's difficult to do, but I really think that what we need to do is be at single purpose with Iran and Russia to move Assad out so that everything can be concentrated against Daesh. And without that, I'm very worried about the future.
In this discussion about migrants and those coming into the United States, you have talked about the visa waiver program. You've said it's the soft underbelly. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, I can, because we have 38 countries that are visa waiver countries, virtually all of Europe. So there have been some 5,000 Europeans that have gone to fight in Syria, and they can come back, and through the visa waiver program, there's no visa. They can just come in to the United States. So what some of us are working on, and this will be a bipartisan bill, I'm working with Senator Flake, and I'm going to work with others as well as many on the Democratic side, to put together a piece of legislation that says if you have been to Iraq or Syria in the last 5 years, you're not eligible for the visa waiver program, and then strengthens a number of visa waiver parts, and also provides that everybody has to get a visa. And that's not so bad. You know, the big supporters of visa waiver are the business community, because some 20 million people come in and stay for 3 months, do business. Most go back, some don't, but most go back. But what attacks do to business, to the hotel industries, to the retail industries in Paris, in Belgium, in any country that's struck, is only going to gain if we don't solve the problem correctly. And that means to strengthen that visa waiver program. And I think Europe is on its ways to putting back some border. It's on its ways to taking some action with respect to encryption, which we ought to be doing as well, so that we are able to, with court order, be able to gain content where we have high suspicion that the individuals communicating are communicating about a plot to commit a terrorist activity.
In the changes that have been made to the U.S. intelligence capabilities since 9/11, that have been made to change the worries about people's private information, do you believe that the intelligence community has all the tools it needs to track the kinds of threats that America now faces?
I can say this, Director Comey and I think John Brennan would agree that the Achilles heel in the internet is encryption, because there are now, it's a black web and there's no way of piercing it. And this even in commercial products. PlayStation, John, which our kids use, if the two ends communicate, that's encrypted. So terrorists could use PlayStation to be able to communicate, and there's nothing that can be done about it.
The tech community says if you tried to do something, develop a backdoor that law enforcement could use, that would open up all kinds of other communication. It would financial transactions, other sensitive information would then be at risk if what you're talking about would be put into place.
No, I don't think so. I think with a court order, with good justification, all of that can be prevented. It can be prevented in Europe because Europe has been a major driver for more encryption, and I think they are now seeing the results. And I think, you know, I have visited with all of the general counsels of the tech companies just to try to ask them to take bomb building recipes off the internet, recipes that have been tested and we know can explode a plane, directions where to sit on the plane to blow it up. We know there are bombs that can go through magnetometers, and to put that information out on the internet is terrible. So, and I sort of got, well, pass a law. So we may just have to do that, but I am hopeful that the companies, most of whom are my constituents, not most, but many, will understand what we're facing. And we're not crying wolf. There's good reason for this. And people are dying all over the world. And I think the Sinai Russian airliner is a classic example of a bomb that got on a plane that blew up that plane.
Okay, Senator Feinstein, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.